In the suburban Mitchell family dining room in Maple Ridge, a vulnerable young college student was about to confront a system of conditional love that had silenced their authentic self for years. What started as a hopeful family reunion dinner took a shocking turn when they came face to face with systematic emotional exclusion disguised as hospitality. Riley Mitchell wasn't your typical struggling student. For 2 years, they had spent their life building independence from scratch after coming out as non-binary, known for their resilience and determination to succeed without family support while juggling multiple jobs and community college. When they encountered their mother's deliberate serving of a peanut butter sandwich on a paper plate, while everyone else received gourmet steak on fine china, they had no idea they were walking into a moment that would crystallize years of subtle family cruelty. Riley's refusal to accept this degrading treatment would lead to a complete severing of toxic family ties and the courageous choice to build their own chosen family. What began as a desperate attempt at reconciliation would become a powerful journey of self-advocacy and authentic living. The Mitchell family would never be the same after one person's refusal to accept conditional love exposed the devastating cost of demanding conformity over acceptance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The text message appeared on Riley's cracked phone screen at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right as they were calculating whether they could afford both groceries and the bus fare to campus this week. The answer, as usual, was no. "Hey Riley, Mom's making Sunday dinner this week. Family's all coming. You should be there too. 6 p.m. Let me know?" Marcus Riley's thumb hovered over the screen, reading the words again. Then again. The phone trembled, slightly in their hand. Whether from exhaustion after pulling a double shift at the campus bookstore, or from the unexpected surge of hope, they couldn't tell. 2 years. 2 years since they'd sat at their family's dining table. 2 years since they'd heard their mother's laugh echo through the house where they'd grown up. 2 years since they'd felt like they belonged anywhere that mattered. The studio, apartment around them told the story of those 2 years in stark detail. A mattress on the floor served as both bed and couch. A card table doubled as desk and dining surface, currently covered with textbooks from the community college where Riley was slowly, carefully building toward a degree in social work. The kitchenette consisted of a mini fridge, a hot plate, and a microwave that only worked if you held the door just right. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Every cramped, lonely square foot of it belonged to someone who had chosen authenticity over comfort, truth over conditional love. Riley's finger traced the edge of their phone case, a rainbow pride flag that had cost $3 at a campus event. $3 they probably shouldn't have spent, but it had felt like a small act of defiance, a quiet declaration that they wouldn't hide who they were. Not anymore. The memory surfaced without warning, as it often did when they thought about home. Their last dinner at the Mitchell family table. The careful pronouns that never quite stuck. The pointed questions about when they'd figure things out and settle down with someone nice. The slow, suffocating realization that their family's love came with conditions they couldn't meet without losing themselves entirely. They'd left that night. Packed a single suitcase and walked out into the suburban darkness, choosing uncertainty over the certainty of never being truly seen. But Marcus's text? Marcus was different. He'd been the one to slip Riley money during those first terrible months. He'd been the one to call, even when their parents disapproved. He'd been the one to understand, even if he couldn't quite manage to act on that understanding when it mattered most. Riley's fingers moved across the phone's keyboard before they could stop themselves. "Why now?" The response came quickly. "Because I miss you. Because Sunday dinners aren't the same without you arguing with Dad about politics and helping Mom in the kitchen. Because maybe enough time has passed that everyone can try again." "Everyone?" Riley typed back. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. "I hope so." Hope. That dangerous, persistent emotion that Riley had tried so hard to bury. It flickered to life in their chest like a match struck in darkness. Small, fragile, but impossibly bright. They scrolled through their contacts until they found Elena's name. Elena Santos, who had become family in all the ways that mattered. Elena, who brought homemade tamales to Riley's apartment and never once questioned their identity or their choices. Elena, who had held them while they cried after particularly difficult conversations with their parents and who celebrated every small victory in Riley's hard-won independence. The phone rang twice before Elena's familiar voice filled the tiny space. "Hey, Amer, what's up?" "I got a text from Marcus," Riley said without preamble. "They want me to come to Sunday dinner." Silence stretched between them. Riley could picture Elena's face, the way her dark eyes would narrow with concern, the way she'd unconsciously straighten her shoulders as if preparing for battle. "What do you want to do?" Elena asked finally, her voice carefully neutral. "I don't know." The words came out smaller than Riley intended. "Part of me wants to believe that things could be different, that maybe they've had time to think, to understand. And the other part?" Riley closed their eyes, sinking onto their mattress. "The other part remembers exactly how it felt to be the only one at that table who didn't belong. To watch everyone else exist so easily in a space where I had to constantly translate myself into something digestible." "You don't owe them anything, Ry. You know that, right?" It was something Elena said often, a gentle reminder that Riley sometimes needed to hear. But today, the words felt more complicated than usual. "I know," Riley said, "but they're still my family, and Marcus, he really does try. Trying isn't the same as doing." The truth of that statement settled heavy in Riley's chest. Marcus meant well. He always had. But meaning well hadn't stopped him from staying silent when their father made cutting remarks about Riley's phase. It hadn't stopped him from looking away when their mother would forget to include them in family photos or holiday planning. "What if this time is different?" Riley asked, hating how young they sounded. Elena's sigh carried all the love and frustration of someone who had watched a friend hurt themselves repeatedly on the same sharp edges. What if it's not? That question hung in the air between them. Riley knew Elena was right to be concerned. The pattern was clear. Hope, disappointment, pain, withdrawal, repeat. But this felt different somehow. Marcus's text had carried something Riley hadn't heard from their family in years. Genuine longing. "I think I need to try," Riley said finally. "I think I need to know for sure." "Okay." Elena's voice was soft now, resigned but supportive. "But promise me you'll take care of yourself. Promise me you won't let them make you feel small again." "I promise." They talked for a few more minutes about Elena's classes and Riley's upcoming midterms, but Riley's mind was already elsewhere. After hanging up, they stared at Marcus's text for a long time before typing their response. "I'll be there." The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Riley found themselves distracted during lectures, their minds spinning through possible scenarios. They'd catch themselves practicing conversations in their head, explanations of their life, their choices, their identity, that might finally make their family understand. On Saturday, they made a decision that depleted their carefully hoarded savings, but felt necessary. They bought new clothes, not expensive ones, a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans from a thrift store, but clothes that fit well and made them feel confident. As they tried them on in the small fitting room, Riley studied their reflection with the critical eye of someone who had learned to armor themselves with appearance. Back in their apartment that evening, they stood before the cracked mirror they'd salvaged from a yard sale and practiced. "I'm doing well in school. I'm studying social work because I want to help families communicate better." The words felt hollow, performative. They tried again. "I've been working hard and taking care of myself. I've found community and friendship and meaning in my life. Better, more honest. I'm still the same person I've always been. I'm still your child, your sibling. I'm just finally honest about who that person is." The reflection stared back at them. 22 years old, tired but determined, carrying the weight of 2 years' worth of independence and growth. They saw their mother's stubborn chin, their father's serious eyes, Marcus's gentle smile. They saw themselves, complex and authentic and worthy of love. Riley's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Remember what we talked about. You are enough, exactly as you are." They typed back, "Thank you. I love you. Love you too. Call me after, okay? Okay. Riley set the phone aside and returned to the mirror. Tomorrow they would walk into the house where they'd grown up and try once more to bridge the gap between who they were and who their family needed them to be. They would hope for acceptance while preparing for rejection. They would offer their authentic self and see if it was finally enough. The reflection in the mirror nodded back at them, and for a moment, Riley felt ready. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything look like a magazine photograph. Riley stood at the bus stop 3 blocks from their apartment, checking their reflection in their phone's black screen for the 3rd time. The thrift store shirt felt foreign against their skin. Too formal, too much like a costume designed to make them palatable. The familiar neighborhood came into view through the bus window like scenes from someone else's life. Manicured lawns stretched between houses that cost more than Riley would make in 5 years. SUVs sat in driveways beside basketball hoops and perfectly arranged seasonal decorations. It was the kind of place where image mattered more than truth, where conformity was rewarded with belonging. Riley's childhood home materialized at the end of Maple Street, and their breath caught despite themselves. The 2-story colonial looked exactly the same. White siding pristine, shutters painted a welcoming blue, flower beds that their mother tended with the same meticulous care she applied to everything in her life. A carved wooden sign by the front door proclaimed, "The Mitchell Family Esther 1995," in cheerful script. The irony wasn't lost on Riley. They were Mitchell family too, but their name felt conspicuously absent from that declaration. 2 cars sat in the driveway, their parents' silver sedan and Jessica's gleaming black BMW. Riley's stomach clenched. They'd hoped to arrive first, to have a few minutes to ease into the family dynamic before everyone was assembled. But here, they were once again arriving last to their own family gathering. The front door opened before Riley could even ring the bell. Their mother appeared, and for a split second, Riley saw genuine joy flash across Maggie Mitchell's face. But it was quickly replaced by that practiced smile Riley remembered so well. Warm on the surface, calculating underneath. "Riley! Oh, sweetheart, you made it!" Maggie's arms wrapped around them in a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and whatever elaborate meal she'd been preparing all day. But there was something performative about the embrace, as if she were conscious of being watched. "Hi, Mom." Riley's voice came out smaller than they'd intended. Maggie pulled back, her hands still on Riley's shoulders, and her eyes began their familiar inventory. "You look, well, a little thin maybe? But that shirt is nice. Very professional." The words carried the weight of subtext. "You clean up nicely when you try." "Thanks." Riley stepped into the foyer, immediately overwhelmed by the familiar smells and sounds of home. Classical music played softly from the living room. Something rich and savory wafted from the kitchen. Everything was exactly as they remembered, as if their absence had been just a pause rather than a fundamental rupture. "David!" Maggie called toward the living room. "Riley's here!" Their father appeared in the doorway, newspaper still in his hand. David Mitchell looked older than Riley remembered. More gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but his smile was genuine, if cautious. "Good to see you, kiddo." He approached for a brief, awkward hug. Riley caught the scent of his aftershave, the same brand he'd worn their entire childhood. "How was the bus ride?" The casual mention of the bus, rather than asking why they hadn't driven, was a small kindness. David had always been better at avoiding the landmines of conversation, even if he wasn't brave enough to diffuse them. "Not too bad. Traffic was light." "Well, come in, come in. Jessica and Tom are in the living room. Marcus should be here any minute." Riley followed their parents into the living room, where Jessica sat on the cream-colored sofa that no one had been allowed to sit on as children. She looked up from her wine glass, something red and expensive, and Riley saw the familiar tightness around her eyes that had always appeared when she was stressed. "Riley!" Jessica's voice was pitched too high, too bright. She stood and approached for another hug, this one briefer than their mother's. "You look good. Different, but good." Tom rose from his chair beside the fireplace, and Riley remembered why they'd always liked their brother-in-law. He was the kind of person who meant what he said, who didn't traffic in the subtle violence of subtext. "Hey Riley, good to see you." His handshake was firm, his smile uncomplicated. "How's school going?" "Really well, actually. I'm hoping to finish my associate's degree next spring." "That's great." Tom's enthusiasm seemed genuine. "What are you studying?" "Social work. I want to focus on family therapy and—" "Oh, how wonderful," Maggie interrupted, appearing with a glass of wine for Riley. "Though I do hope you're keeping your options open. You're still so young, after all." The words landed like tiny cuts. "You're still so young" was family code for, "you don't really know what you want yet." It was the same thing they'd said about Riley's identity, their choices, their attempts at independence. Riley accepted the wine glass, noting that it was filled less generously than the others. A small thing, probably unconscious, but part of the pattern they remembered all too well. "Actually, I'm pretty committed to this path," Riley said carefully. "I've been volunteering at a community center, and I really love the work." "Volunteering?" David's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's generous of you, considering." He didn't finish the sentence, but Riley heard the unspoken words. "Considering you can barely afford to take care of yourself." "The work is meaningful," Riley said. "Sometimes that matters more than money." An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Jessica took a large sip of her wine, while Tom looked confused by the sudden tension. "Speaking of work," Jessica said quickly, "I just got promoted to senior account manager. We're handling the Morrison Industries campaign now, you know, the ones with the big manufacturing plants." The conversation pivoted smoothly to Jessica's success, Tom's recent golf tournament, David's thoughts on the insurance industry's quarterly projections. Riley listened, sipping their wine and marveling at how easily their family could fill the air with words that said nothing meaningful. They found themselves studying the room they'd grown up in, noting what had changed, and what had remained the same. The family photos on the mantelpiece had been updated. Newer pictures of Jessica and Tom's wedding, their parents' anniversary trip to Europe, Marcus at his graduate school graduation. Riley searched for any sign of themselves in the visual narrative of their family's life. There, one photo from high school graduation, tucked behind a larger frame. Riley at 18, still performing the role their parents wanted them to play. Their hair longer then, their smile more careful. They wondered if their absence from the newer photos was intentional, or if their family had simply stopped thinking of them as part of the story worth documenting. "Oh, that reminds me," Maggie said, as if reading Riley's thoughts. "Mrs. Patterson from down the street asked about you last week. She remembered you from when you used to babysit her grandson. I told her you were figuring things out." Figuring things out. Another family euphemism. Riley had been figuring things out for 2 years now, as if their identity and independence were just a phase to be endured rather than a life to be respected. The front door opened with a familiar jingle of keys, and Marcus's voice called out, "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder." Riley felt their shoulders relax slightly as their younger brother appeared in the living room doorway. Marcus looked good. Healthier than the last time they'd seen him. His grad school stress less visible in his face. His eyes found Riley immediately, and his smile was warm, uncomplicated. "Hey, stranger." Marcus crossed the room and pulled Riley into a hug that felt real, free of performance or calculation. "Glad you came." "Me too," Riley said, and for the first time since arriving, they meant it. "Marcus, dear, could you help me in the kitchen?" Maggie's voice carried its familiar tone of gentle command. "I want to make sure everything's perfect for dinner." As their mother disappeared into the kitchen, with Marcus trailing behind after an apologetic glance at Riley, the living room conversation resumed its careful dance around anything substantial. Tom asked polite questions about Riley's neighborhood. "Is it safe? Are you close to the bus line?" While Jessica offered updates on mutual acquaintances from high school. "Sarah Johnson got married. Did you see the photos on Facebook?" Riley noticed how their family worked around them, like water flowing around a stone. They were present, but not integrated. Acknowledged, but not included in the easy rhythm of family interaction. Every response required translation. Every shared memory had to be carefully edited to avoid topics that might lead to uncomfortable territory. The smells from the kitchen grew richer, more complex. Riley could hear their mother's voice directing Marcus, the familiar symphony of a Mitchell. Family dinner preparation. They remembered being part of that process once, helping set the table, stirring sauces, being trusted with the important details that made their mother's meals legendary among their parents' social circle. "Dinner in about 15 minutes, Marcus announced, returning from the kitchen with a beer in his hand and a slightly strained expression. "Wonderful," David said, folding his newspaper with satisfaction. "I don't know how your mother does it. Everything always turns out perfect." Perfect. Riley turned the word over in their mind as the conversation continued around them. That was what their family valued above all else. The appearance of perfection. The maintenance of an image that could withstand scrutiny from neighbors, colleagues, and extended family. Riley had never learned how to be perfect in the way their family required. They'd never mastered the art of hiding uncomfortable truths behind pleasant facades. They'd never learned to value harmony over honesty. As they sat in their childhood living room, surrounded by the people who were supposed to know them best, Riley felt the familiar ache of being a stranger in their own family. But beneath that ache was something new, a quiet strength built from 2 years of learning to trust their own perceptions, to value their own worth. Whatever happened at dinner, they would survive it. They had before. The call to dinner came with the kind of orchestrated precision that Riley remembered from childhood. Maggie appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, her face flushed with the satisfaction of a meal perfectly timed. "All right, everyone, let's eat while it's hot," she announced, her voice carrying that particular note of pride that always accompanied her culinary performances. The dining room looked like something from a home and garden magazine. The mahogany table gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier, set with the good china that had been their grandmother's. Delicate white porcelain with tiny blue flowers around the rim. Crystal glasses caught the light, and cloth napkins were folded into perfect triangles beside each place setting. A centerpiece of fall flowers and small pumpkins completed the tableau of suburban domesticity. Riley counted the place settings, automatically. 6 chairs around the table, 6 sets of china, 6 crystal glasses. They were included in the count, at least. "Riley, you sit there," Maggie directed, pointing to a chair that put Riley's back to the kitchen. It was the same seat they'd occupied as a child. Convenient for parents to monitor behavior, but removed from the center of conversation. Some things, apparently, never changed. Tom held Jessica's chair as she settled in, the gesture automatic after years of marriage. David took his place at the head of the table, unfolding his napkin with ceremonial care. Marcus slid into the chair across from Riley, offering a small smile that carried apology and encouragement in equal measure. "I hope everyone's hungry," Maggie said, beginning to serve from the kitchen with the efficiency of long practice. "We have herb-crusted filet mignon, roasted fingerling potatoes with rosemary, and that green bean almondine that Tom always requests." Riley watched the parade of dishes emerge from the kitchen, each one more elaborate than anything they'd eaten in months. The steaks were perfectly seared, the vegetables artfully arranged, the presentation restaurant quality. Their mother had always been a talented cook, but tonight's meal felt particularly extravagant. "This looks incredible, Mom," Jessica said, accepting her plate with genuine appreciation. "You've really outdone yourself." "Well, it's not every day we have the whole family together," Maggie replied, setting down Tom's plate next. It seemed like an occasion worth celebrating. The words might have been warm, but Riley caught the slight emphasis on whole family, as if their absence had been the only thing preventing this kind of elaborate celebration, as if their return was what made the family complete again. David received his plate next, followed by Marcus. Riley waited, stomach growling despite their nerves, watching their mother's careful choreography of service. This was how it had always been. Everyone else served first. Riley's needs addressed last, almost as an afterthought. But instead of returning to the kitchen for Riley's plate, Maggie sat down and began cutting into her own steak. Riley waited. Another moment, assuming their mother had simply forgotten in the excitement of serving everyone else. It wouldn't be the first time. "Mom?" Riley's voice was carefully neutral. "I think you missed me." Maggie looked up with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, of course, sweetheart. I have something special for you." She rose from her chair and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Riley surrounded by the sounds and smells of everyone else beginning their meal. Conversation flowed around them. Tom complimenting the seasoning on the potatoes, Jessica asking about the wine pairing, David praising the perfect doneness of his steak. Riley's hands rested in their lap, empty while everyone else's were busy with silverware. The familiar feeling of being slightly out of sync with their family's rhythm settled over them like an old, uncomfortable sweater. When Maggie returned from the kitchen, she was carrying something that made Riley's breath catch in their throat. A paper plate, the kind used for children's birthday parties, with a cartoon character smiling from the rim. On it sat a peanut, butter and jelly sandwich, cut diagonally, with a small pile of potato chips on the side. "I thought you might prefer something simpler," Maggie said, setting the plate down in front of Riley with that same bright smile. "I know how you've always been such a picky eater, and I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable with anything too fancy." The words hit Riley like a physical blow. Around the table, everyone else continued eating their gourmet meal from fine china, while Riley stared down at a children's lunch served on disposable dinnerware. The contrast was so stark, it felt surreal, like a fever dream version of family dinner. Riley's voice caught. They tried again. "I'm not really a picky eater anymore, Mom. I would have been fine with whatever everyone else is having." "Oh, but I remember how you used to turn your nose up at anything that wasn't plain," Maggie said, settling back into her chair. This seemed safer, more you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. More you. The words carried layers of meaning that Riley was only beginning to unpack. Simple, childish, separate. Less than. Tom looked up from his steak, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "Wait, why is Riley's dinner different?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Riley felt everyone's attention shift to them, to their paper plate, to the obvious disparity between their meal and everyone else's. "I just thought," Maggie began, but her voice trailed off under Tom's genuinely confused gaze. "Mom made Riley's favorite," Jessica said quickly, her voice too bright. "Isn't that thoughtful?" But Tom's confusion was evident. "A peanut butter sandwich? For Sunday dinner?" Riley stared down at the sandwich, their vision blurring slightly. They thought of all the elaborate meals they'd helped prepare in this kitchen, all the times they'd set this table with careful attention to detail, all the Sunday dinners where they'd been trusted with the good china and included in the family's culinary traditions. "It's fine," Riley said quietly, picking up half of the sandwich. "Thank you for thinking of me, Mom." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. The paper plate felt flimsy in their hands, a sharp contrast to the weight and elegance of the china everyone else was using. The sandwich was exactly what someone might pack for a child's lunch, while the adults around the table enjoyed a meal that probably cost more than Riley's grocery budget for a month. "So, Riley," David said, apparently deciding to move past the awkward moment. "Marcus tells us you're doing well in school. What classes are you taking this semester?" Riley swallowed a bite of sandwich, the peanut butter sticking to the roof of their mouth. "Introduction to Family Systems Theory, Research Methods in Social Work, and Human Development Across the Lifespan." "That sounds very academic," Maggie said, cutting a delicate piece of her steak. "Though I do worry about the job prospects in social work. It's such a difficult field, and the pay." "The pay isn't great," Riley admitted, "but the work is meaningful. I'm learning about how families communicate, how patterns get passed down through generations, how to help people break cycles that aren't serving them anymore." They hadn't meant for the words to carry any particular weight, but the silence that followed suggested they'd hit closer to home than intended. "Well, that's very noble," David said finally. "Though I hope you're also taking some practical courses, maybe some business classes. You always were good with numbers." "I'm taking the courses I need for my major, Dad." Of course. I just think it's wise to keep your options open. You're still young, after all. Plenty of time to figure out what you really want to do." There it was again. The suggestion that Riley's choices were temporary. A phase to be outgrown, rather, than a direction to be respected. Tom, who had been listening to this exchange with growing bewilderment, set down his fork. Can I ask you something, Riley? And please tell me if this is out of line, but what pronouns do you use? I want to make sure I'm being respectful. The question landed in the middle of the table like a hand grenade. Riley felt their parents and Jessica tense simultaneously, while Marcus looked up from his plate with something that might have been relief that someone was finally addressing. The elephant in the room. They and them, Riley said simply. Thank you for asking. Tom nodded seriously. Got it. And you've been using those pronouns for a while now? About 2 years. Cool. Tom returned to his meal as if this was the most natural conversation in the world. Jessica mentioned you're non-binary? I'll be honest, I'm still learning about all this stuff, but I think it's great that you know who you are. The casual acceptance in Tom's voice was like oxygen to someone who'd been drowning. Riley felt their chest loosen slightly, even as they noticed their parents' increasing discomfort. Tom, Jessica said quietly, her voice carrying a warning. What? I'm just trying to understand. Riley's family, right? Shouldn't we all be trying to understand? Of course we want to understand, Maggie said, her voice tight. But these things are complicated and very personal. What's complicated about it? Tom asked, genuinely puzzled. Riley knows who they are. We love Riley. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Riley wanted to hug their brother-in-law in that moment. Tom's simple acceptance, his refusal to make their identity into something shameful or confusing, highlighted just how much effort their family had put into making it complicated. It's not that simple, Tom, David said, his voice carrying the weight of someone explaining something to a child. There are considerations about family dynamics, about what's appropriate to discuss at the dinner table. Like what? Tom's question was direct, uncompromising. What's inappropriate about Riley telling us who they are? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Riley took another bite of their sandwich, the bread feeling like cardboard in their mouth. Around the table, their family struggled with a question that Tom had made sound absurdly simple. What was inappropriate about accepting Riley for who they were? Marcus cleared his throat. I think what Tom's getting at is that Riley's identity isn't really something we need to debate. It's just who they are. Marcus, Maggie's voice carried a sharp edge of warning. What, Mom? It's true. Riley's been clear about this for 2 years. At some point, don't we just accept it? Riley looked up from their paper plate to see their younger brother's face set with determination. For the first time all evening, someone was speaking up for them. Someone was refusing to let their identity be treated as a topic for family debate. We all want what's best for Riley, David said carefully. But that doesn't mean we have to pretend that this situation isn't complicated. What situation? Tom asked. Riley being non-binary? How is that complicated? The question hung in the air, exposing the fundamental disconnect between Tom's straightforward acceptance and the family's elaborate dance around Riley's identity. Riley felt a strange mixture of gratitude toward Tom and sorrow for their family, who seemed incapable of the simple acceptance that came so naturally to someone who barely knew them. As the conversation continued to spiral around them, Riley stared down at their paper plate and felt the weight of 2 years' worth of hope slowly crumbling. Nothing had changed. If anything, the contrast between their treatment and everyone else's had become more stark, more undeniable. They were still the outsider at their own family table, still the problem to be managed, rather than the person to be loved. The weight of the paper plate in Riley's hands felt heavier with each passing moment. Around the table, conversation had stuttered to an uncomfortable halt, everyone suddenly fascinated with their perfectly prepared meals. The silence stretched taut, filled only with the soft clink of silverware against china. Everyone's china, except Riley's. Riley forced themselves to take another bite of the sandwich, but the peanut butter seemed to expand in their mouth, making it difficult to swallow. They reached for their water glass, noting absently that while everyone else had been served wine, their glass contained only water. Another small exclusion, another tiny paper cut in the death by 1,000 cuts that was this dinner. This is really delicious, Mom, Jessica said finally, her voice artificially bright as she attempted to restore some semblance of normalcy. The herb crust is perfect. Thank you, dear. I got the recipe from that cooking magazine you gave me for Christmas. Maggie's response carried gratitude that felt disproportionate to the compliment, as if Jessica had thrown her a lifeline. Tom, however, seemed unable to let the moment pass. He looked around the table, his gaze lingering on Riley's paper plate, then back to his own fine china, his brow furrowed with the kind of confusion that comes from witnessing something that fundamentally doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, he said, setting down his fork with deliberate care. I'm really trying to understand here, but why exactly is Riley eating a different meal, off a paper plate? The question hit the room like a stone thrown through a window. Riley felt every gaze at the table shift to them, their paper plate, their sandwich that now felt like evidence of some terrible crime. Tom, please. Jessica's voice carried a note of desperation. Let's just enjoy dinner. But I don't understand, Tom continued, his voice rising slightly. Everyone else gets steak and the good china, and Riley gets a kid's lunch on a paper plate? How does that make sense? Riley watched their mother's face cycle through a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, irritation, calculation. When she spoke, her voice carried that particular tone of patient explanation that Riley remembered from childhood, the one reserved for explaining why their perspective was wrong. I was just trying to be considerate, Maggie said, her smile tight at the edges. Riley's always had particular tastes. I thought they'd be more comfortable with something familiar. Particular tastes? Tom's confusion was genuine, almost innocent in its directness. Like what? Well, they've always been difficult about food, very picky. And given their situation, I thought it would be easier to just give them something simple. There it was, the casual cruelty wrapped in concern, the way their mother could make exclusion sound like kindness. Riley felt something cold settle in their stomach, heavier than the sandwich they'd been forcing down. My situation? Riley's voice came out quieter than they'd intended. You know what I mean, sweetheart. Maggie's tone was infuriatingly gentle. Things have been challenging for you lately. I just didn't want to add any stress. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Riley almost questioned their own perception. Almost. But 2 years of therapy through the community college's counseling center had taught them to trust their instincts, to recognize manipulation even when it came wrapped in maternal concern. I'm not stressed by food, Mom. I'm stressed by being treated like a child at my own family's dinner table. The words came out sharper than Riley had intended, cutting through the careful veneer of family politeness like a knife. They saw their father's jaw tighten, Jessica's eyes widen with alarm. Marcus leaned forward with something that might have been support or worry. Riley, David's voice carried warning. Your mother went to a lot of trouble to make this dinner special. Special for who? The question escaped before Riley could stop it. Because it doesn't feel very special to be the only one eating, off a paper plate while everyone else gets the good china. It doesn't feel special to get a peanut butter sandwich while everyone else gets filet mignon. You're being dramatic, Maggie said, but her voice had lost some of its artificial sweetness. I was trying to be thoughtful. Thoughtful would have been asking what I wanted to eat. Thoughtful would have been including me in the same meal as everyone else. This? Riley gestured to their paper plate. This is exclusion disguised as consideration. Tom nodded emphatically. That's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, no offense, Mrs. Mitchell, but this looks like what you'd give a kid who was being punished. The comparison hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Riley felt it settle into their bones, the realization that Tom, an outsider to their family's dynamics, could see clearly what their own family refused to acknowledge. That's enough. David's voice cut through the tension with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Riley, apologize to your mother. She worked hard to prepare this meal. I'm not apologizing for pointing out that I'm being treated differently than everyone else at this table. You are different, Maggie said, her mask finally slipping completely. You've made that abundantly clear. So, yes, I treated you differently. I tried to accommodate your choices. The word choices landed like a slap. Riley felt the familiar fire rise in their chest, the anger that came from having their identity reduced to a decision, their authenticity dismissed as rebellion. My choices? Riley's voice was steady now, clear. Like the choice to be honest about who I am. The choice to live authentically instead of pretending to be someone I'm not. You chose to leave this family, Maggie said, her voice rising. You chose to cut yourself off from people who love you. You chose to live in that place, doing whatever it is you do, instead of coming home and working things out like a mature adult. I didn't leave the family. I left a situation where I had to pretend to be someone else to be accepted. No one asked you to pretend anything, David interjected. We asked you to be respectful of family values. Whose values? Riley stood up from their chair, the paper plate still in their hands. Because my values include honesty, authenticity, and treating family members with equal respect. And this? They held up the plate. This isn't respect. Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, Dad, Riley's right. This is messed up. You can't invite them to family dinner and then exclude them from the actual family meal. Marcus, stay out of this, Maggie warned. No. Marcus's voice was stronger, now more certain. I won't stay out of it. Riley is my sibling. They deserve the same treatment as the rest of us. Riley deserves the treatment they've earned, David said coldly, which is exactly what they're getting. The words hit Riley like a physical blow. The careful mask their father had worn all evening, the polite distance, the cautious welcome, fell away completely, revealing the judgment underneath. They had been weighed and found wanting. They had been deemed unworthy of the basic dignity afforded to every other family member. Jessica, who had been silent through most of the confrontation, finally spoke up. Dad, that's not fair. Isn't it? David's gaze moved around the table, challenging each of them. Riley made their choices. They chose to reject everything this family stands for. They chose to embarrass us, to make our lives more difficult. And now they want to waltz back in here and demand that we pretend nothing happened? I'm not pretending nothing happened, Riley said, their voice surprisingly calm. I'm hoping that maybe you've had time to think about what happened. Time to realize that loving your child shouldn't be conditional on them being who you want them to be. Love? Maggie laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think this isn't love? You think setting boundaries isn't love? You think protecting this family's reputation isn't love? I think giving me a peanut butter sandwich on a paper plate while everyone else gets a real meal is the opposite of love. I think it's cruelty disguised as care. Riley looked around the table, at their parents' angry faces, at Jessica's obvious discomfort, at Marcus's supportive but helpless expression, at Tom's continued bewilderment at the dysfunction, playing out before him. You know what? Riley set the paper plate down on the table with deliberate care. I think I understand now. This dinner wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about welcoming me back or trying to repair our relationship. This was about putting me in my place. This was about making sure I understood exactly where I stand in this family's hierarchy. Riley, don't be ridiculous, Maggie said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I being ridiculous? Because from where I'm sitting, or was sitting, this looks like a very clear message. Everyone else gets respect, dignity, and inclusion. I get tolerance at best, and even that comes with conditions. Riley picked up the paper plate again, holding it up so everyone could see it clearly. This plate represents exactly how you see me. Disposable, temporary, not worthy of the good stuff, just good enough for the leftovers of your attention and affection. The silence that followed was deafening. Riley could hear their own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 2 years' worth of hope finally, definitively crashing down around them. I came here tonight because I wanted to believe that family could mean something more than conditional acceptance. I wanted to believe that love could be stronger than disappointment. But this... They gestured to the paper plate, to the table, to the entire elaborate performance of inclusion that excluded them so completely. This tells me everything I need to know about where I actually stand. Tom broke the silence with a simple, devastating observation. This is really messed up. And it was. Riley could see it now with crystalline clarity. Not just the paper, plate, but the entire evening. The careful choreography of their exclusion. The way they'd been included just enough to be hurt by their marginalization. The performance of family harmony that required their silence and compliance. They had been invited to dinner, but not to belong. They had been welcomed home, but not accepted. They had been offered love, but only if they were willing to accept less than everyone else at the table. The paper plate in their hands felt like evidence of a crime. Proof of how a family could destroy someone with 1,000 tiny cuts. Each one small enough to deny, but collectively devastating. Riley looked around the table one more time, memorizing the faces of people who were supposed to love them unconditionally, but had instead taught them that love always came with a price they were unwilling to pay. "Thank you," Riley said finally, "for making this so clear." The paper plate trembled in Riley's hands as the weight of the moment settled over the dining room. The silence that followed their words felt dense, charged with years of unspoken resentments and carefully avoided truths. Riley could feel their heart hammering against their ribs, but for the first time all evening, their voice felt steady, clear. "Clear about what?" Maggie asked, her tone sharp with defensive anger. "Clear about the fact that we invited you into our home? Clear about the fact that we made you dinner and tried to make you comfortable?" Comfortable. Riley's laugh was hollow. "Mom, you gave me a children's lunch on a paper plate while everyone else ate gourmet food off the good china. In what universe is that meant to make me comfortable? I was being considerate of your dietary restrictions." "What dietary restrictions?" "I don't have any dietary restrictions. I never have." Maggie's face flushed red. "Well, I didn't know what you eat anymore. You don't exactly keep us informed about your life. Because every time I try to share anything about my life, you either dismiss it or find a way to make it about how I'm disappointing you." Riley's voice was gaining strength now, 2 years of suppressed frustration finally finding an outlet. "When I called to tell you I made Dean's List last semester, you asked when I was going to transfer to a real school. When I mentioned my job at the community center, you asked when I was going to find real work. Nothing I do is ever good enough because I'm not who you want me to be." "That's not true," David interjected, but his voice lacked conviction. "We want what's best for you." "No, Dad. You want what's most convenient for you. You want me to go back to pretending to be someone I'm not, so you don't have to deal with the discomfort of having a non-binary child." The word non-binary seemed to hit the room like a physical force. Riley watched their parents flinch, saw Jessica look away, noticed how even speaking their identity aloud seemed to create ripples of discomfort around the table. "There," Riley said, noting their reactions. "You can't even hear the words without getting uncomfortable. You can't even acknowledge who I am without acting like I've said something offensive." "It's not that simple," Maggie said, her voice rising. "You can't expect us to just accept this overnight. You can't expect us to pretend that this is normal. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. I'm asking you to love me, the real me, not some version of me that makes you more comfortable." "We do love you," David said, but the words rang hollow in the elegant dining room. "But love doesn't mean we have to agree with your choices." "My choices?" Riley felt the familiar fire ignite in their chest. "Dad, being non-binary isn't a choice. It's who I am. It's who I've always been. The only choice I made was to stop lying about it." Tom, who had been watching this exchange with growing distress, suddenly spoke up. "Wait, hold on. You're talking about Riley being non-binary like it's some kind of moral failing or something. Like they chose to make your lives difficult. But they didn't choose to be non-binary any more than I chose to be straight." "Tom, please," Jessica said quietly, her discomfort obvious. "This is a family matter." "I am family," Tom said, his voice firm. "And as family, I have to say this is really messed up. Riley's identity isn't hurting anyone, but the way you're treating them is definitely hurting Riley." Maggie turned her attention to Tom, her voice taking on that patronizing tone Riley knew so well. "Tom, you don't understand the complexities of this situation. You don't know what we've been through as a family." What you've been through. Marcus finally exploded, his diplomatic restraint finally snapping. What about what Riley's been through? They've been living on their own for 2 years, working multiple jobs, putting themselves through school, all while dealing with the fact that their own family can't accept who they are. Marcus, that's enough, David warned. No, Dad, it's not enough. It's not nearly enough. Marcus stood up from his chair, his face flushed with anger. Do you have any idea how many times Riley's called me crying because they miss this family? Do you know how hard it's been for them to build a life while feeling like they don't belong anywhere? They chose to leave, Maggie said, her voice cold. We didn't kick them out. You might as well have, Marcus shot back. You made it clear that they weren't welcome here unless they pretended to be someone else. That's not love, Mom. That's conditional acceptance, and it's cruel. Riley felt a surge of gratitude toward their younger brother, mixed with sadness that it had taken this long for him to speak up. But they also felt the familiar exhaustion that came with having to justify their existence, with having to defend their right to be loved for who they were. Marcus, you don't understand, Jessica said, finally finding her voice. It's not just about Riley. It's about the family. It's about what people think, what people say. What people say? Riley turned to face their sister, feeling something crack open in their chest. Jessica, are you seriously telling me that what strangers might think about our family is more important than your siblings' well-being? Jessica's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment, Riley saw past the perfect facade to the scared, people-pleasing person underneath. It's not that simple, Riley. You don't understand the pressure. The pressure of what? Of having a family member who doesn't fit into your neat little boxes? Of having to explain to your friends that your sibling uses different pronouns? Yes. Jessica's voice broke on the word. Yes, it is hard. It is awkward. It is uncomfortable to have to constantly explain and defend and justify. Imagine how I feel, Riley said quietly. Imagine having to constantly explain and defend and justify your own existence. Imagine having to choose between being authentic and being loved by your family. Imagine sitting at this table tonight, looking at this paper plate, and realizing that your own family sees you as less deserving of basic dignity than everyone else. The words hung in the air, finally giving voice to the deeper hurt beneath Riley's anger. This wasn't just about a sandwich or a paper plate. This was about belonging. This was about worth. This was about love. Maggie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I cannot believe how ungrateful you're being. I cannot believe you're sitting in my house, at my table, after I cooked for you and welcomed you back, and you're attacking this family. I'm not attacking anyone, Mom. I'm telling the truth about how I've been treated. Your truth, Maggie said, her voice dripping with disdain. Your perspective. Your version of events. But that's not the only truth here, Riley. The truth is that you rejected this family long before we ever rejected you. How did I reject this family? By choosing this lifestyle. By choosing to embarrass us. By choosing to make everything about yourself and your identity. The word identity came out like a curse, and Riley felt something fundamental shift inside them. The last threads of hope they'd been clinging to finally snapped. My lifestyle? Riley's voice was deadly calm now. You mean my life? The life where I work 40 hours a week and go to school full-time and volunteer in my community and try to make the world a little bit better? That lifestyle? You know what I mean. No, Mom, I don't. Because nothing about my life should embarrass you except maybe the fact that your child has to work 3 jobs to afford rent because their family cut them off for being honest about who they are. David slammed his hand on the table, making the china rattle. That's enough. We didn't cut you off. You left. You made that choice. I left because staying meant lying about who I was every single day. I left because I couldn't breathe in a house where my identity was treated like a dirty secret. I left because I finally realized that your love came with conditions I couldn't meet without destroying myself. Riley looked around the table at their family, really looked at them. Their mother's face was twisted with anger and something that might have been shame. Their father's jaw was set in stubborn denial. Jessica was crying quietly into her napkin, and Marcus looked like he was watching a car crash in slow motion. Only Tom met their gaze directly. His eyes filled with something that looked like understanding and sorrow. "Do you want to know what the real tragedy is?" Riley asked, their voice soft now, almost conversational. "The real tragedy is that I came here tonight hoping you'd all grown, hoping you'd learned, hoping that maybe you'd missed me enough to examine your own behavior and figure out how to love me better." They picked up the paper plate again, holding it like evidence in a trial. "But this plate tells me that nothing has changed. You still see me as less than. You still think my identity is something to be managed rather than celebrated. You still believe that your comfort is more important than my dignity." "Riley, please," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Don't give up on us. We can work through this." Riley looked at their younger brother with infinite tenderness and infinite sadness. "Marcus, I've been working through this for 2 years. I've been patient and hopeful and forgiving. I've made excuse after excuse for why this family can't seem to love me without conditions. But I'm done." They stood up from their chair, still holding the paper plate. "I'm done accepting crumbs and calling it love. I'm done being grateful for tolerance. I'm done pretending that being included in your family is worth sacrificing my dignity." "So that's it?" Maggie asked, her voice shrill with hurt and anger. "You're just going to walk away again? You're going to abandon this family again?" Riley looked at their mother for a long moment, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the person behind the carefully constructed facade. Maggie Mitchell was terrified. Terrified of change, terrified of judgment, terrified of a world that didn't conform to her narrow definitions of acceptable. "Mom," Riley said gently, "I can't abandon a family that never truly accepted me in the first place." The silence that followed was deafening. Riley could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, could hear their own breathing, could hear the sound of their family's carefully constructed world crumbling around them. "I'm going to leave now," Riley said, setting the paper plate down on the table with careful precision. "And I want you all to think about this plate. I want you to think about what it represents. I want you to think about whether this is really the love you want to offer the world." They turned toward the dining room door, then paused, looking back at their family one last time. "And when you're ready to offer me the same respect and dignity you offer everyone else at this table, when you're ready to love me without conditions, you know where to find me." With that, Riley walked toward the door, leaving behind the paper plate, the peanut butter sandwich, and the last remnants of their hope for unconditional family love. Riley's hands shook as they reached for the front door handle, the weight of what had just happened settling into their bones like lead. The voices from the dining room had erupted into argument the moment they'd left, their mother's shrill protestations mixing with Marcus's angry responses and their father's demands for everyone to lower their voices. The sound of their family's dysfunction followed them through the house like smoke. The cool October air hit their face as they stepped onto the front porch, and Riley had to grip the railing to steady themselves. 2 years of therapy had taught them to recognize the physical symptoms of emotional overwhelm, the racing heart, the shallow breathing, the way their vision seemed to narrow to a tunnel. They forced themselves to take deep, measured breaths, counting in for 4, holding for 4, out for 4. "Rough dinner?" The voice startled Riley from their breathing. "Exercise." They looked up to see Mrs. Chen standing at the edge of her yard, a small watering can in her weathered hands. The elderly woman had been the Mitchells' neighbor for as long as Riley could remember, and her garden was legendary in the neighborhood, a riot of carefully tended flowers that seemed to bloom in impossible succession from spring through fall. "Mrs. Chen, I didn't see you there." "Hard to see much of anything when you're carrying that much pain." She set down her watering can and approached the low fence that separated their properties. In the porch light, her face was kind, but knowing. "You want to talk about it?" Riley almost said no automatically, the trained response of someone who had learned not to burden others with their problems. But something in Mrs. Chen's expression stopped them. There was no pity there, no awkward discomfort. Just patient, weathered wisdom. "It didn't go well," Riley said finally. "I figured as much when I heard the shouting. Your mother's voice carries when she's upset." Mrs. Chen's tone was matter-of-fact, without judgment but also without surprise. "First time back in a while?" 2 years. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. That's a long time to be away from family. Sometimes it doesn't feel long enough. The words came out more bitter than Riley had intended, but Mrs. Chen didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned against the fence, settling in as if she had all the time in the world. You know, I've been watching your family for 23 years, she said conversationally. Watched you kids grow up, watched your parents navigate all the challenges that come with raising children. Your mother's always been someone who likes things orderly, predictable. Riley let out a short, humorless laugh. That's one way to put it. Change is hard for people like your mother. Makes them feel like they're losing control. And when Margaret Mitchell feels like she's losing control. Mrs. Chen shrugged. Well, let's just say the whole neighborhood knows about it. Did you hear what happened tonight? I heard raised voices and saw you come out here looking like someone had hit you with a truck. I can fill in the details. Mrs. Chen studied Riley's face in the porch light. But I also know that you've been taking care of yourself just fine these past 2 years. I see you at the bus stop sometimes, heading to work or school. Always polite when you wave. Always carrying yourself with dignity. The simple observation hit Riley harder than they expected. To be seen, really seen, by someone who had no obligation to notice or care. It felt like a small miracle. Some families, Mrs. Chen continued, think love means making people fit into the shape they want them to be. Other families understand that love means celebrating the shape people already are. She paused, watching a moth flutter around the porch light. Your family's still learning the difference. I don't think they want to learn. Maybe not, but that's not really your problem to solve, is it? Before Riley could respond, the front door opened behind them. Marcus emerged, his face flushed and his hair disheveled, looking like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Riley! Wait! He called out, jogging down the porch steps. Please don't leave like this. Mrs. Chen gave Riley a meaningful look. I'll be in my garden if you need anything, she said quietly, then picked up her watering can and retreated to give them privacy. Marcus reached Riley's side, breathing hard from emotion rather than exertion. This is so messed up. I can't believe they treated you like that. Can't you? Riley's voice was tired. Because this is exactly what I expected, Marcus. This is exactly who they've always been. No, it's not. They used to be better than this. When we were kids, I was performing a role. I was being who they wanted me to be. The minute I stopped performing, their true feelings became pretty clear. Marcus leaned against the porch railing, his shoulders sagging with defeat. I tried to defend you in there. I told them how proud I am of you, how hard you've been working, how much you've accomplished on your own. What did they say? Dad said I was being manipulated by your agenda. Mom said I was too young to understand the real-world consequences of people like you existing openly. Riley felt something cold settle in their stomach. People like me. I told them that was fucked up. I told them that you're my sibling and I love you exactly as you are. I told them that if they can't figure out how to love you too, then they're the ones with the problem. And Marcus's laugh was bitter. Dad told me I was welcome to leave too if I didn't like how they run their household. Riley turned to study their younger brother's face. Marcus had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth over family conflicts and find compromise where none existed. But tonight, he'd chosen a side. Tonight, he'd risked his own standing in the family to defend them. I'm sorry, Riley said quietly. I didn't want you to get caught in the middle of this. I put myself in the middle of this, finally. Marcus scrubbed his hands over his face. I should have done it years ago. I should have stood up for you when it mattered instead of just watching. From inside the house, they could hear the argument continuing. Jessica's voice had joined the mix now, though it was hard to make out individual words through the walls. What are they fighting about now? Riley asked. Everything. Jessica's crying because she knows this was wrong, but she's too scared to really stand up to Mom and Dad. Tom's completely bewildered by the whole family dynamic and keeps asking why everyone's okay with treating you like shit. Dad's insisting that they did nothing wrong and that you're just being dramatic. And Mom? Marcus shook his head. Mom's in full victim mode, crying about how ungrateful you are and how she just wanted to have a nice family dinner. Riley's phone buzzed in their pocket. They pulled it out to see Elena's name on the screen. "Hey," they answered, stepping away from Marcus slightly. "How's it going, Amer? I've been thinking about you all evening." The sound of Elena's voice, warm, concerned, unconditionally loving, nearly broke Riley's composure. It's exactly what you were worried it would be." "Oh, Ry, I'm so sorry. Do you need me to come pick you up?" Riley looked back at the house, where the argument was still raging, then at Marcus, who was watching them with a mixture of guilt and determination. "Actually, could you? I don't think I can handle the bus ride right now." "Of course. Send me the address. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Thank you. I love you. I love you too. And Riley, whatever happened in there, it's not about you. It's about them." Riley hung up and turned back to Marcus. "Elena's coming to pick me up." Marcus nodded. "The friend from school, right? The one who brought you soup when you had the flu." "She's family," Riley said simply. "Chosen family." The distinction hung in the air between them. Marcus understood. Riley could see the recognition in his eyes, the painful acknowledgement that sometimes the people who love you best aren't the ones you share DNA with. "I want to be better," Marcus said quietly. "I want to be the kind of brother who deserves to be your family, chosen family." Riley studied their younger brother's face, seeing the genuine remorse and determination there. "You stood up for me tonight. That's a start. It's not enough. I should have been standing up for you all along." Before Riley could respond, the front door opened again. This time it was Jessica who emerged, her mascara smudged and her perfect composure completely shattered. She looked between Riley and Marcus, her face crumpling with fresh tears. "Riley, I'm so sorry. Tonight was awful. You didn't deserve any of that." Riley waited, recognizing the rhythm of Jessica's apologies. There was always more coming, usually a but that would undermine everything that came before it. "I know I haven't been a good sister to you. I know I've been more concerned with keeping peace than with protecting you. But you have to understand, it's so hard to know what to say, what to do. Mom and Dad are so intense about this, and I don't want to make things worse for anyone." There it was, the rationalization that always followed Jessica's moments of clarity. Riley felt tired suddenly, bone-deep exhausted by the emotional labor required to navigate their family's dysfunction. "Jessica," Riley said gently, "you can't protect everyone, and trying to keep peace with people who are being cruel just enables their cruelty. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But actually standing up to them, it's terrifying." Riley nodded, understanding the fear even if they couldn't accept it as an excuse. "I get it. But your comfort is costing me my dignity. Your peace is coming at the expense of my belonging. At some point, you have to decide what matters more." Jessica's face crumpled again, and she wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. "I hate this. I hate that loving you and keeping the family together feel like opposing forces." "They don't have to be," Marcus said quietly. "We could choose to be a family that actually accepts Riley. We could choose to stand up to Mom and Dad's bullshit instead of enabling it." "And if they cut us off too?" Jessica asked, her voice small with fear. Riley looked at their sister, successful, accomplished, living the life their parents had always wanted for all their children, and saw the prison she'd built for herself out of their approval. "Then you'd learn what I learned," Riley said. "That love that comes with conditions isn't really love at all. And that sometimes the family you need is the one you choose, not the one you're born into." From inside the house, they heard their mother's voice rise to a near shriek. "Where is everyone? We're supposed to be having a family dinner." Marcus and Jessica exchanged a look, and Riley saw the moment they both realized how absurd it all was. The insistence on maintaining the fiction of family harmony while treating one family member as fundamentally unworthy of basic respect. In the distance, Riley could see headlights turning onto their street. Elena, coming to rescue them from the wreckage of their biological family's dysfunction. Coming to remind them that they were worthy of love that didn't require them to diminish themselves. "That's my ride," Riley said, straightening their shoulders. "I need to go." "Will you?" Marcus started, then stopped. "Can I still call you? Can we still talk?" Riley considered the question seriously. Marcus had finally shown up for them tonight, but patterns built over years didn't change in a single evening. "Yes," they said finally. "But things have to be different, Marcus. I'm done being the family secret. I'm done pretending that their treatment of me is normal or acceptable. If you want to be in my life, you have to be willing to acknowledge that openly." Marcus nodded, his expression resolute. "I understand, and I want to be better. I will be better." Riley looked at Jessica, who was still crying quietly. "Jessica?" Their sister looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I need time. I need to figure out how to be brave." It wasn't the answer Riley had hoped for, but it was honest. And after an evening of manipulation and gaslighting, honesty felt like progress. Elena's car pulled up to the curb, and Riley felt their shoulders relax for the first time all evening. Home. Not the house behind them, with its perfect facade and toxic interior, but the unconditional love waiting in that car. "I have to go," Riley said, walking toward the street. "Riley," Marcus called after them. "I love you, and I'm proud of who you are." The words followed Riley to Elena's car, a small gift to carry into whatever came next. Elena's car felt like a sanctuary after the emotional battlefield of the Mitchell family dining room. Riley sank into the passenger seat and immediately felt the tension in their shoulders begin to release. Elena had always had this effect on them. Her presence alone was a reminder that love didn't have to hurt, that acceptance could be simple and complete. "Jesus, Ree," Elena said softly, taking in Riley's tear-streaked face and shaky hands. "You look like you've been through a war." "Feels like it," Riley managed, their voice hoarse from the evening's confrontations. "Thank you for coming. Always." Elena reached over and squeezed Riley's hand. "You want to talk about it, or do you want to just sit with it for a while?" Riley leaned back against the headrest and closed their eyes. "Can we just drive for a bit? I don't think I can process all of this yet." Elena pulled away from the curb without another word, understanding exactly what Riley needed. They drove through the familiar streets of Riley's childhood neighborhood, past houses where their former classmates lived with their parents who probably loved them without conditions, past the park where Riley had played as a child when the world seemed simpler and their place in their family felt secure. 20 minutes later, Elena pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. "Coffee?" she asked simply. Riley nodded, grateful for Elena's intuitive understanding of what they needed. Not their apartment, where they'd be alone with their thoughts. Not Elena's place, where they'd feel like they were imposing. Just a neutral space where they could exist without performing for anyone. The diner was nearly empty at this hour. Just a few late-shift workers and insomniacs scattered across the worn vinyl booths. Elena chose a corner table away from the other patrons, and they settled in with steaming cups of coffee that tasted like comfort and normalcy. "Okay," Elena said gently, after they'd both had a few sips. "Tell me." Riley stared into their coffee cup, watching the cream swirl in patterns that reminded them of the chaos in their chest. "They gave me a peanut butter sandwich on a paper plate, while everyone else ate steak off the good china." Elena's coffee cup hit the table harder than she'd intended. "They what?" "You heard me." Riley's voice was flat with exhaustion. "Everyone else, my parents, Jessica, Tom, Marcus, they all got this elaborate dinner. Filet mignon, roasted vegetables, wine, the whole production. And my mom handed me a PB&J on a paper plate like I was a 5-year-old who couldn't handle real food. That's..." Elena paused, clearly struggling to find words that adequately captured the cruelty of what Riley was describing. "That's psychological warfare disguised as hospitality." Riley nodded, feeling validated by Elena's immediate understanding of how devastating the gesture had been. The worst part was how she did it. With this smile, like she was being considerate, like she was doing me a favor by giving me something simple because she knew I had particular tastes. Particular tastes? Code for difficult, code for different, code for not worthy of the same treatment as everyone else. Riley's hands tightened around their coffee mug. She made my exclusion sound like inclusion. She made my humiliation sound like care. Elena leaned forward, her dark eyes blazing with protective anger. I hope you told them exactly what you thought of their bullshit. I did. Eventually. Riley recounted the evening's events, the careful choreography of their marginalization, Tom's confused questions that exposed the family's dysfunction, the explosive confrontation that had finally brought years of buried resentment to the surface. And then I walked out, Riley finished. Left them all sitting there with their perfect dinner and their perfect denial. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing everything Riley had shared. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. I'm proud of you. Riley looked up, surprised. For what? For losing my temper? For ruining their dinner party? For refusing to accept less than you deserve? For speaking truth to people who were trying to gaslight you into believing their treatment of you was normal? For walking away instead of staying and letting them continue to hurt you? The words hit Riley harder than they'd expected. They'd been so focused on the failure of the evening, the collapse of their hopes for reconciliation, that they hadn't considered it might also represent a kind of success. It doesn't feel like a victory, Riley said quietly. It feels like losing them all over again. Sometimes losing people who don't know how to love you properly is the only way to make room for people who do. They sat in comfortable silence, for a while, the diner's fluorescent lights humming overhead. Riley watched Elena add more sugar to her coffee, a habit she'd picked up from her grandmother, and felt grateful for the small, familiar comfort of being known by someone who accepted all their contradictions and complexities. Marcus stood up for me, Riley said eventually. Finally. It was too little, too late, but he tried. How did that feel? Riley considered the question. Bittersweet. Like where was that support 2 years ago when I needed it most? But also, it felt good to have someone in my family finally say that their treatment of me was wrong. And Jessica? Jessica's still Jessica. Torn between doing the right thing and keeping everyone happy. She apologized, but then immediately started explaining why it's so hard for her to stand up to our parents. Same old pattern. Elena nodded knowingly. She'd heard plenty about Jessica's conflict avoidance over the years. What about your parents? Riley's jaw tightened. My dad said I deserved the treatment I got. My mom accused me of being ungrateful and dramatic. They're convinced that they're the victims in this situation, that I'm the one being unreasonable by expecting basic dignity. Classic abuser mentality. Make the victim responsible for their own mistreatment. The word abuser hung in the air between them. Riley had been reluctant to apply such a harsh term to their parents, but the evening's events had stripped away their ability to minimize what they'd experienced. Is that what this is? Riley asked quietly. Abuse? Elena considered her words, carefully. Emotional abuse doesn't always look like screaming and name-calling. Sometimes it looks like systematic exclusion disguised as care. Sometimes it looks like making someone feel grateful for scraps of attention. Sometimes it looks like a paper plate at a table full of fine china. Riley felt something crack open in their chest, not breaking, but finally acknowledging a truth they'd been avoiding. I keep thinking I should try harder. Keep reaching out, keep hoping they'll change. Why? Because they're my family. Because family is supposed to be forever. Because giving up on them feels like giving up on the idea that I'm worthy of their love. Elena reached across the table and took Riley's hands in hers. Ry, listen to me. Your worth isn't determined by your family's ability to recognize it. Your value doesn't depend on their approval. You are lovable exactly as you are, and the fact that they can't see that says everything about them and nothing about you. Tears pricked at Riley's eyes, not the angry tears from earlier, but something deeper and more cleansing. I wanted so badly for tonight to be different. I wanted to believe that family could mean something more than conditional acceptance. Family can mean that. Just maybe not with them. Riley thought about Marcus on the porch, his genuine remorse and determination to do better. They thought about Mrs. Chen's quiet wisdom and unexpected support. They thought about Elena, who had dropped everything to rescue them from their family's dysfunction, and was now sitting in a late-night diner, helping them process their pain. "You know what the strangest part is?" Riley said. "Tom, Jessica's husband, he was the only one who seemed genuinely confused by how they were treating me. He kept asking why my meal was different, why everyone was okay with such obvious exclusion. It took an outsider to point out how abnormal their behavior was. Outsiders often see dysfunction more clearly than the people trapped in it. They haven't been conditioned to accept the unacceptable." Riley's phone buzzed with a text message. They glanced at the screen and saw Marcus's name. "I meant what I said on the porch. I want to be better. I'm sorry it took me so long to find my voice." Riley showed the message to Elena, who read it, with a thoughtful expression. "What do you think?" Riley asked. "I think people can change, but they have to prove it with actions, not just words. Marcus had 2 years to stand up for you, and he chose family peace over your well-being. That doesn't mean he can't change, but it means you get to set the terms for how he earns back your trust." Another text came through, this one longer. "I told Mom and Dad that I'm not going to pretend their treatment of you was okay. I told them that if they want me to be part of this family, they need to figure out how to include you with dignity and respect. I know I should have said this years ago. I know words aren't enough. But I'm going to do better." Riley stared at the message, feeling a complicated mix of hope and wariness. It was what they'd wanted to hear for so long, but the timing felt convenient. A reaction to crisis rather than a genuine change of heart. "He's saying the right things," Elena observed, reading over Riley's shoulder. "But will he follow through when the crisis passes? When the pressure is off, and it's easier to just go back to the way things were? That's the question, isn't it?" Riley set their phone aside and picked up their coffee again. The liquid had cooled, but it still provided comfort. Something warm to hold on to in the midst of emotional chaos. "I don't know how to trust them again," Riley said quietly. "I don't know how to hope for change without setting myself up for more disappointment." "Maybe you don't have to figure that out tonight. Maybe you can just sit with what happened and let yourself feel whatever you're feeling without having to decide what it all means for the future." Riley nodded, grateful for Elena's wisdom. They'd spent so much energy over the years trying to manage their family's emotions, trying to find the right words or the right approach that would finally make them understand. Tonight had taught them that some people weren't ready to understand, no matter how clearly you explained yourself. "I think I'm done trying to convince them to love me," Riley said finally. "I think I'm ready to focus on the people who already do." Elena smiled, the first genuine smile Riley had seen all evening. "Now that sounds like a plan worth pursuing." As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave the diner, Riley felt something shift inside them. The pain of the evening was still there, would probably be there for a while, but underneath it was something new. A quiet determination to stop accepting less than they deserved, to stop making themselves smaller to fit into spaces that weren't designed for them. They were done with paper plates. They were ready to set their own table. The ride back to Riley's apartment was quiet, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that only existed between people who truly understood each other. Elena's presence was a balm after the evening's emotional carnage, and Riley found themselves able to breathe properly for the first time since walking into their childhood home. As they pulled up to Riley's building, a converted Victorian house, divided into studio apartments that housed college students and young professionals who couldn't afford anything better, Riley felt the familiar mix of pride and defensiveness that always accompanied bringing someone from their old life into their new reality. "You want me to come up?" Elena asked gently. "I don't want you to be alone tonight if you don't want to be." Riley considered the offer. Part of them craved solitude to process what had happened, but a larger part knew that isolation would only give their family's words more power to echo in their head. "Yeah," they said finally. "I'd like that." Elena's presence in Riley's small space immediately made it feel less cramped and more cozy. She moved around the apartment with easy familiarity, putting on the kettle for tea and settling onto the floor cushions that served as Riley's living room furniture. This was chosen family in action, the kind of love that didn't require grand gestures or perfect settings, just presence and acceptance. "So," Elena said as she handed Riley a steaming mug of chamomile tea, "what happens now?" Riley wrapped their hands around the mug, absorbing its warmth. "I think I need to actually walk away this time. Not just physically leave dinner, but emotionally detach from the idea that they're going to change." "That's a big decision." "It is. But I think tonight was my answer. I spent 2 years hoping that distance and time would help them gain perspective, that maybe they'd miss me enough to examine their own behavior. Instead, they doubled down. They found new ways to exclude me while maintaining the fiction that they were being welcoming." Riley's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Marcus. They stared at the screen, watching their brother's name flash insistently. "You don't have to answer that," Elena said quietly. "I know, but I think I want to. I think I need to say some things clearly while I still have the courage." Riley answered the call. "Hi, Marcus." "Riley, thank God. Are you okay? I've been worried sick since you left." "I'm fine. I'm with Elena." "Good. That's good." Marcus's voice was strained, like he'd been crying or yelling or both. "Listen, I need to tell you what happened after you left. The whole thing exploded. Jessica finally told Mom and Dad exactly what she thought of how they treated you. Tom said he was disgusted by the whole family and that he was ashamed to be associated with us. And I—" Marcus paused, taking a shaky breath. "I told them. I was done enabling their behavior. I told them that what they did tonight was cruel and inexcusable, and that if they couldn't figure out how to treat you with basic human dignity, then I didn't want to be part of this family either." Riley felt a complex swirl of emotions: gratitude that Marcus had finally taken a stand, sadness that it had taken this long, and wariness about whether this newfound courage would last. "How did they respond?" "About how you'd expect. Dad said I was young and naive and that I'd understand when I was older. Mom cried and said she was being attacked by her own children for trying to protect the family. They're completely convinced they did nothing wrong." Riley closed their eyes, unsurprised but still disappointed. Even faced with unanimous criticism from their other children and son-in-law, their parents remained committed to their narrative of victimhood. "Marcus, I appreciate you standing up for me. I really do. But I need you to understand something. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep hoping that they'll change or that family dinners will somehow get better. Tonight was my final attempt at reconciliation. Riley, please don't give up on all of us because of Mom and Dad. I'm not giving up on you. But I am giving up on the idea of this family as a unit that includes me. I'm done trying to earn a place at a table where I'm not wanted." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was small. "So what does that mean for us? For our relationship?" Riley looked across their small apartment at Elena, who was pretending to read a textbook while clearly listening to every word. Elena, who had never made Riley explain their worth or justify their existence. Elena, who had driven across town at 9 p.m. on a Sunday night without question because Riley needed rescue from their own family. "It means our relationship has to exist outside of family dynamics," Riley said carefully. "It means you can't ask me to come to family events or try to broker peace between me and our parents. It means you have to choose whether you want a relationship with me as I am, in the life I've built, or if you only want a relationship with me as part of the family unit. I want a relationship with you. The real you. I've always wanted that. I didn't know how to navigate everything else. Then that's what we'll do. But Marcus, it has to be different. I won't be anyone's secret or side relationship. I won't pretend that our parents' behavior is normal or acceptable. And I won't put myself in situations where I'm expected to tolerate being treated as less than human for the sake of family harmony." "I understand. And Riley, I'm going to do better. I know I should have stood up for you years ago. I know I failed you when you needed support most. But I want to learn how to be the brother you deserve. Riley felt tears prick at their eyes. Not the angry tears from earlier, but something softer and more hopeful. I'd like that, Marcus. But it's going to take time. Trust has to be rebuilt through actions, not just words. I know. I'm willing to do the work. After they hung up, Riley sat in silence for a moment, processing the conversation. Elena looked up from her book with a questioning expression. He wants to maintain a relationship outside of family dynamics, Riley explained. Says he's willing to do the work to rebuild trust. How do you feel about that? Cautiously optimistic. He's saying the right things, but Marcus has always been good at saying the right things. The test will be whether he follows through when it's difficult. Riley's phone buzzed with a text, this time from Jessica. I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, but I need you to know that what happened tonight was wrong. I've been thinking about it all evening, and I can't stop crying. You didn't deserve any of that. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I'm sorry I've been a coward. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Riley showed the message to Elena, who read it with a thoughtful expression. Another family member having a crisis of conscience, Elena observed. Jessica's been having crises of conscience about our family for years. The question is whether she'll actually do anything about it this time, or just feel guilty until the guilt becomes inconvenient. As if summoned by their conversation, Riley's phone rang again. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. Jesus, it's like they all coordinated, Riley muttered, but answered the call anyway. Hi, Jessica. Riley, I'm so sorry. Jessica's voice was thick with tears. I've been sitting here thinking about tonight, about that paper plate, about how you must have felt, and I'm devastated. How did we become the kind of family that does something like that? You became that kind of family gradually, Riley said, their voice gentle but firm. Through small compromises and little silences and choosing comfort over courage, through deciding that keeping peace was more important than protecting the people being hurt by that peace. I know you're right. And I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see how wrong we've been. Jessica, I appreciate that, I do. But seeing it isn't enough anymore. I've been waiting for someone in this family to not just see the problem but actually do something about it. What can I do? How can I make this right? Riley considered the question seriously. Jessica's pattern had always been to feel guilty, apologize profusely, then gradually return to old behaviors when the crisis passed. But there was something different in her voice tonight. A depth of remorse that Riley hadn't heard before. You can start by having honest conversations with Mom and Dad about their behavior, not just in moments of crisis, but consistently. You can stop enabling their treatment of me by refusing to participate in family events where I'm excluded or treated poorly. You can use your position as the golden child to advocate for change instead of just feeling bad about the status quo. And if they threaten to cut me off too? The question hung in the air, exposing the real fear underneath Jessica's guilt. She was horrified by their parents' treatment of Riley, but she was also terrified of losing her own privileged position in the family hierarchy. Then you'll learn what I learned, Riley said, echoing their earlier conversation with Mrs. Chen. That love that comes with conditions isn't really love at all. Jessica was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I'm brave enough for that. Then you have some thinking to do about what kind of person you want to be and what kind of family you want to be part of. After Jessica hung up, promising to think about everything and figure out how to be braver, Riley set their phone aside and looked at Elena. I think I'm done taking calls for tonight. Probably wise. You've had enough emotional labor for one evening. Riley curled up on their mattress, pulling a blanket around themselves like armor. I keep thinking about that paper plate, about how calculated it was. She didn't just forget to include me in the meal. She made a deliberate choice to serve me something different, something lesser. It was a power play disguised as consideration, Elena agreed. A way of putting you in your place while maintaining plausible deniability. The worst part is how she smiled when she did it, like she was being so thoughtful and accommodating. Elena moved to sit beside Riley on the mattress, her presence warm and grounding. You know what I keep thinking about? How you handled it. You didn't let them gaslight you into believing their treatment was normal. You called it out clearly and refused to accept their justifications. It doesn't feel like a victory. Maybe, not yet. But someday, when you're sitting at a table where everyone gets the same respect and dignity, you'll remember tonight as the moment you decided you deserved better. Riley leaned against Elena's shoulder, exhausted by the evening's emotional upheaval, but also feeling something they hadn't expected: relief. For 2 years, they'd carried the weight of hope and disappointment, the constant low-level stress of wondering if their family might change. Tonight had finally given them clarity. I think I'm going to write them a letter, Riley said suddenly. A letter? Something clear and final, something that explains exactly why I'm stepping back from family relationships and what would need to change for me to reconsider. Not because I think they'll actually change, but because I want to be absolutely clear about my boundaries. Elena nodded approvingly. That sounds healthy. A way of taking back your power in the situation. Riley's phone buzzed one more time. Text from their mother. Riley, I hope you've had time to think about your behavior tonight. When you're ready to apologize for the way you spoke to your family, we can discuss moving forward. Family means forgiveness, sweetheart. I love you. Riley showed the message to Elena, who read it with an expression of pure disgust. When you're ready to apologize, Elena read aloud. The audacity is breathtaking. Riley stared at the message, marveling at their mother's ability to rewrite reality in real time. Even after everything that had happened, Maggie Mitchell remained convinced that Riley was the problem, that Riley owed the family an apology for refusing to accept mistreatment gracefully. You know what? Riley said, a strange calm settling over them. I think I just got my final answer. They typed back, I have nothing to apologize for. I was treated with disrespect and cruelty tonight, and I responded by standing up for myself. That's not something I'll ever apologize for. When you're ready to acknowledge your behavior and make real changes, you know where to find me. Riley hit send before they could second-guess themselves, then immediately blocked their mother's number. There, they said, feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified. I think that's my official resignation from the Mitchell family. Elena wrapped an arm around Riley's shoulders. How does it feel? Riley considered the question, taking inventory of their emotional state. The pain was still there. Would probably always be there on some level, but underneath it was something new. Freedom. Scary, they said finally. But also, lighter. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I forgot how much it weighed until I finally put it down. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle through Riley's small window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The work of building a life based on chosen family rather than blood relations. The process of healing from family trauma. The ongoing task of creating belonging in a world that often felt hostile to people like them. But tonight, in their small apartment with Elena's steady presence beside them, Riley felt something they hadn't experienced in years. Peace with their choices. They had walked away from a table where they weren't truly welcome, and for the first time, that felt like exactly the right thing to do. The paper plate was behind them now. Ahead lay the possibility of tables where everyone belonged, where love came without conditions, where being yourself was enough. Riley pulled out their laptop and began to type, Dear Mom, Dad, Jessica, and Marcus, tonight was the last time I will subject myself to being treated as less than equal in my own family. 1 year after the dinner. The auditorium at Riverside Community College buzzed with the nervous energy of graduation day. Families filled the folding chairs, their voices creating a low hum of excitement and pride as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Riley sat in the front section reserved for graduates, their cap and gown feeling both foreign and significant. Tangible proof of what they'd accomplished through sheer determination and countless hours of juggling work, school, and the emotional labor of rebuilding their life. The Associate of Arts degree in social work represented more than academic achievement. It was evidence of resilience, of the capacity to thrive despite being cut off from the family support system that most of their classmates took for granted. Every late night spent studying after double shifts, Every tuition payment scraped together from multiple part-time jobs, every moment of doubt overcome, it had all led to this moment. Riley scanned the audience, easily finding the small but enthusiastic cheering section that had become their chosen family. Elena sat in the third row, wearing a dress the color of sunflowers and holding a bouquet of the wildflowers she and Riley had picked that morning. Next to her, Mrs. Chen had claimed the aisle seat, her walker decorated with ribbons in the school colors, and a small sign that read, "Proud of Riley," in her careful handwriting. Marcus occupied the chair beside Mrs. Chen, looking nervous but determined. He'd driven 3 hours from his graduate program to be here, despite knowing that his presence might create tension with their parents if they found out. The fact that he'd chosen to come anyway, without fanfare or expectation of credit, represented the kind of steady support that had slowly rebuilt trust between them. Alex sat at the end of the row, having graduated the previous semester, but insisting on returning for Riley's ceremony. They wore a pin on their jacket lapel, a small rainbow flag that caught the light as they waved enthusiastically at Riley. The gesture was typical Alex, quietly rebellious, visibly proud, unapologetically authentic. Dr. Martinez, Riley's faculty advisor, caught their eye from the faculty section and offered an encouraging nod. She had been instrumental in helping Riley navigate the challenges of being a non-traditional student, offering not just academic guidance, but genuine mentorship about pursuing social work as someone who had experienced family rejection firsthand. "Riley Mitchell," the dean called out, and Riley felt their hearts skip as they stood and walked across the stage. The applause from their small cheering section was disproportionately loud for their numbers. Elena's whistle cut through the polite clapping of other families, while Mrs. Chen's voice could be heard calling out, "That's my honorary granddaughter," with the kind of unabashed pride that made Riley's chest tight with emotion. As Riley shook hands with the dean and accepted their diploma, they thought about all the people who should have been in the audience but weren't. Their parents, who had raised them to value education and achievement, were absent from this moment of triumph. Jessica, who had sent a congratulatory card, but couldn't bring herself to attend an event that would force her to choose sides in the family's ongoing Cold War. But the absence of biological family felt less significant than it might have a year ago. The people in the audience had chosen to be there, had made Riley's success a priority in their own lives, had celebrated every small victory along the way to this moment. This was what family looked like when it was built on love, rather than obligation. After the ceremony, Riley's chosen family gathered in the small courtyard behind the auditorium. Elena had somehow managed to produce a picnic blanket and a cooler full of sandwiches and sparkling cider, transforming the generic outdoor space into an impromptu celebration. "I'm so proud of you," she said, wrapping Riley in a hug that lifted them slightly off the ground. "You did this. All of it. On your own terms." Mrs. Chen shuffled over with the help of her walker, her eyes bright with tears she wasn't bothering to hide. "I knew from the first day I met you that you were going to do something special with your life. This is just the beginning." Marcus approached more tentatively, clearly aware that his presence at this celebration was a privilege rather than a right. "Riley, I can't tell you how proud I am. Not just of your degree, but of everything you've built for yourself. The way you've created this life, this family, this sense of purpose. It's incredible." Riley studied their brother's face, seeing genuine admiration rather than the complicated mix of guilt and obligation that had characterized his expressions. In the past, their relationship had evolved into something more authentic over the months, built on Marcus's consistent efforts to be present and supportive without trying to manage or fix their relationship with their parents. "Thank you for being here," Riley said simply. "It means a lot." Alex produced a camera and insisted on taking group photos, documenting the moment with the kind of intentionality that people bring to chosen family milestones. These weren't formal graduation portraits, but candid shots of people who genuinely loved each other, celebrating a shared victory. As they packed up the picnic, Dr. Martinez approached their group. "Riley, I wanted to congratulate you again, and let you know that the recommendation letter for your bachelor's program is ready whenever you need it." Riley had been accepted to the State University's social work program with a partial scholarship. Not enough to cover everything, but enough to make the dream of a 4-year degree financially feasible with careful planning and continued work. "Dr. Martinez, "I'd like you to meet my family," Riley said, introducing each person with visible pride. "They've been my support system through all of this." Dr. Martinez shook hands with each member of Riley's chosen family, clearly understanding the significance of the word family in this context. She had worked with enough non-traditional students to recognize the different forms that support systems could take. "You know," she said to the group, "in all my years of teaching, I've learned that the students who succeed aren't necessarily the ones with the most advantages. They're the ones who build strong communities around themselves and refuse to give up on their goals." Riley's built something special here. As they prepared to leave the campus, Riley's phone buzzed with a text message. They almost ignored it. This day was about celebration, not obligation. But the name on the screen made them pause. It was from Jessica. "I saw Marcus's Instagram post about your graduation. I'm so proud of you, Riley. I know I haven't earned the right to say that, but I needed you to know anyway. You've accomplished something incredible." Riley showed the message to Elena, who read it with a thoughtful expression. "How does that feel?" Elena asked. "Complicated," Riley admitted. "I'm glad she's proud. I'm glad she's acknowledging what I've accomplished. But I also know that pride from a distance is easier than support up close." Marcus glanced at the phone screen and winced slightly. "She wanted to come today. She asked me if I thought you'd want her here." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that wanting to be here wasn't enough. That if she wanted to be part of your life, she needed to do. It wasn't enough to want to be present for the good moments. Real support meant being there through the difficulties as well." "I think I'm ready to respond to her," Riley said, pulling up Jessica's message. They typed carefully. "Thank you for the congratulations. I appreciate you respecting my boundaries by not showing up unexpectedly. If you're serious about rebuilding our relationship, I'm open to talking, but it needs to be on my terms and timeline." After a moment's consideration, they added, "I hope you continue to work on understanding why our family's treatment of me was harmful. That understanding is the foundation any future relationship would need to be built on." Riley hit send before they could second-guess themselves, then immediately put their phone away. Today was about celebration, not family management. The group decided to continue the celebration at Riley's apartment, which had undergone another transformation in recent months. Elena's influence was visible everywhere. Art prints on the walls, throw pillows that made the floor seating more comfortable, a bookshelf that Elena had built herself, and filled with social work textbooks, literature, and photo albums documenting their chosen family's adventures. As they settled in with takeout from Riley's favorite Thai restaurant, Mrs. Chen raised her glass of sparkling cider in a toast. "To Riley," she said, "for showing all of us what courage looks like, for choosing authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, and love over fear. To chosen family," Elena added, "for proving that the best relationships are the ones we build rather than the ones we inherit. To second chances," Marcus said quietly, "and the patience to let people prove they deserve them. To breaking cycles," Alex contributed, "and creating the families we needed when we were younger." Riley looked around their small apartment at the faces of people who had chosen to love them without conditions, who had celebrated their successes and supported them through struggles, who had taught them that belonging was something you created rather than something you earned. "To all of that," they said, raising their own glass, "and to the future we're building together." As the evening wound down and their guests prepared to leave, Riley found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The paper plate dinner felt like it had happened in another lifetime, to a different person, someone desperate for approval, willing to accept crumbs of affection, convinced that love required them to diminish themselves. That person had been replaced by someone who knew their own worth, who had learned to recognize genuine love when it was offered, who had discovered that the most profound healing came not from fixing broken relationships, but from building healthy, new ones. Mrs. Chen was the last to leave, moving slowly but insisting she didn't need help getting to her car. "Before I go," she said, pulling a small wrapped package from her purse, "I have something for you." Riley unwrapped the gift to find a delicate ceramic plate, handmade, with tiny painted flowers around the rim that reminded them of Mrs. Chen's garden. It was beautiful but also practical, clearly meant to be used rather than displayed. I made this in a pottery class, Mrs. Chen explained. I thought you might like to have a plate that was made with love, by someone who sees your worth clearly. Riley felt tears prick at their eyes as they understood the significance of the gift. After months of friendship, Mrs. Chen had never directly referenced the paper plate incident, but she clearly understood its symbolic weight. This plate was an answer to that old hurt, proof that they deserved beautiful things, made with care, offered with genuine affection. It's perfect, Riley said, meaning it completely. Thank you. After Mrs. Chen left, Riley and Elena settled, on the floor with cups of tea, the new plate sitting on the coffee table between them like a small piece of art. So, Elena said, how does it feel to be a college graduate? Riley considered the question seriously. Surreal, proud, a little scared about what comes next, but mostly grateful. Grateful for what? For you. For all of this. Riley gestured. Around the apartment, encompassing not just the physical space but everything it represented. Independence, authenticity, chosen family, love given freely. For learning that home is something you create, not something you inherit. Elena smiled, reaching for Riley's hand. What do you think you'll do with your social work degree? I want to work with families. Specifically, I want to help LGBTQ+ youth who are dealing with family rejection. I want to be the person I needed when I was figuring all this out. That's perfect. You'll be amazing at that. Riley picked up Mrs. Chen's plate, feeling its weight and texture, admiring the careful attention to detail in every painted flower. I keep thinking about that night at my parents' house, they said. About how devastated I was by that paper plate. At the time, it felt like the end of the world. This symbol of how little they valued me. And now? Now I think it was actually a gift. Not the plate itself, but what it taught me about my own worth. It forced me to see clearly what I was accepting, what I was willing to tolerate. It made me realize that I deserved better. Elena nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to us turns out to be the thing that saves us. That's exactly what it was. It saved me from a lifetime of accepting conditional love. It forced me to build something better. Riley's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the university's social work program, confirming their enrollment for the fall semester and providing information about orientation. Another step forward, another piece of the future they were building for themselves. Dr. Martinez mentioned something interesting today, Riley said, opening the email to read the details. She said there's a research project starting this fall about family dynamics in the LGBTQ+ community. She thought I might be interested in participating. As a researcher or a subject? Both, potentially. The study is looking at how young people build resilience and create chosen families after experiencing rejection from biological families. She thought my experience might provide valuable insights. Elena grinned. So you'd be getting paid to help other people understand what you've learned? Basically, yeah. Turning my pain into purpose. As they prepared for bed, Riley placed Mrs. Chen's plate carefully in the dish cabinet next to their other dishes. The matching set they'd bought for themselves, each piece chosen with intention and care. The plate fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. Looking at their small collection of dishes, Riley thought about all the meals yet to be shared, all the celebrations yet to be hosted, all the moments of chosen family joy yet to be created. This was their table now, set with care and intention, where everyone who sat down would be welcomed exactly as they were. The paper plate was just a memory now, a reminder of who they used to be and how far they'd traveled. But Mrs. Chen's plate, that was a promise of love given freely, of worth recognized and celebrated, of a future built on the radical foundation of authentic acceptance. Riley smiled as they turned off the lights, already looking forward to tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. They had graduated into their own life, surrounded by people who loved them unconditionally, ready to use their hard-won wisdom to help others find their way home to themselves. The journey from that devastating dinner to this moment of triumph had been long and difficult, but it had led them exactly where they needed to be, free, authentic, and deeply, genuinely loved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.